and there's the well, and you can actually drink the water. They'll pull it up, and you can still drink the water to this day. So that was kind of cool. Okay, I'll make sure I get it right this time. All right, so this is when you walk into the airport in Israel, you see this this sign. And I thought, does anybody see anything that reminds you of a biblical story on their tourism sign? Anything makes you think of a famous Bible story?
Land of creation?
Well, no. These guys carrying a cluster of grapes. What happened when they first came in? Numbers 13:23. From there they cut down a cedar cluster of grapes and they carried it on a pole between two men. So I don't know that's what they're referring, but that makes sense to me, right? That was saying, oh, Israel is a good land. Because when they first came in, they cut down a cluster of grapes. Okay, now an interesting thing is when you go to any of the hotels, and we will read this. Somebody look up Deuteronomy 6:4-9, please. Deuteronomy 6:4-9. If you go to a hotel there in Israel, one of the first things I noticed is they have this. See this little gold bar there? And they have that on the doorpost. And inside the doorpost is a little scroll rolled up with these verses on it. And somebody want to read that?
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates.
Okay, so that's literally what they're doing. This is called the Shema to the Jews. And so remember when they asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? He quotes this. He's quoting what's known as the Shema. And that sort of encapsulates in their mind the bare roots of, what is the Jewish religion, that the Lord God is one. And so it gives those instructions, you shall put these on your doorposts. So they literally do that. And this is at the Wailing Wall, which is one of the walls left from the temple, the second temple. And here, I guess this is probably an American or something Jew that's coming to visit. And what are they doing? They're literally binding the scriptures onto their arms. And they also wear these things with a little scripture on their forehead. So the really Orthodox devout Jews take this very literally, and before they go pray at the Wailing Wall, they'll actually bind those things on their hands and on their foreheads. So they take that admonition from the Shema very literally. So I thought that was interesting as well. Okay. All right, so in Nazareth, this is really cool, that the city which Jesus grew up in, not where he was born, but of course where he grew up, they had this recreation of a first century village. And I'm not going to try to show you all the things they had there, but it was really, really interesting, I have to say. That was one of the highlights of the trip for me, is going to Nazareth and this recreation of a first century village. But I want to point out one of the things I saw about weaving. Here you see they're making clothing and how laborious and time-intensive it would have been. But one of the things they showed us that I really liked was this is the different colored cloth they would have used, right? They actually used natural dyes and things to dye the cloth. Now, one of the things that really jumped out at me was they did have purple, these purple colors up here. And they make those by crushing up these snails. These are marine snails, and so they would crush those up, and something about them makes the purple color. But that's why that was the color of rich people and wealthy people, because it took a lot of work to make that color. You had to crush up a bunch of snails, and it was really, really labor intensive. And so that's why, if you read in Luke 16 about the rich man, how do you know he was rich? He was habitually dressed in purple. So that's how you knew he was rich. And the reason was because if you were wearing the color purple, you were very wealthy because it took a lot of work to make that dye. So, another interesting thing I realized was, but if you go out in the fields, we happen to be there in the spring, and so all over the place there are these poppies, or these wildflowers blooming. And that's an untouched picture. I didn't go into Photoshop and make that prettier or anything like that. That's an untouched picture. And there's these beautiful fields of these poppies all over the place. I mean, they just grow wild. They're not cultivated, right? And so I think it helps you understand when Jesus said, "Why are you worried about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil nor they spin. Yet I say to you that not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these." So you can imagine Solomon, right, wearing purple clothing. And let's go back and just look at that just for a minute. And let's hope I figured this thing out. Let's go look. Okay, so you can imagine Solomon he's maybe wearing purple like this, right? And in all his finery. And yet, you go right outside, and all over the rocky hilltops are these incredibly beautiful flowers. And so all the weaving and all they did could not match the beauty of just one of these flowers. And so you can see Jesus maybe sitting in this field of flowers, right? Surrounded by these things and saying, think about Solomon, right? And all his finery and all his purple robes. And yet he was not adorned as even just one of these flowers here in the field that's going to fade and go away. So why are you worried about it? So that really helped bring that story to life for me. Okay, this is the Church of the Nativity. Supposedly, no one really knows where Jesus was born. There's 2 or 3 sites. Oh, he's born here. No, he's born there. But this is sort of the classic version, and there's a Catholic church built there. And so, supposedly, where you see this little star, that's where he was born. And as you can see, people come in and they prostrate themselves, they worship at the site, they kiss the little star where Jesus was supposedly born. This is a form of worship for them. And there's another one here I want to show you. This is at the church that's supposedly at his gravesite. And let me go back one quick. And this is supposedly, you see in the background here, there's this mural. And here they're preparing the body of Jesus. And this is supposedly where they prepared the body of Jesus before his burial. But I want you to see from this is the same thing. Oh, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's what it's called. It's a big Catholic church. People come here and worship at this stone as well, and here they're kissing it, right? In honor of where Jesus was prepared. But what it reminds me of, and if somebody will read this verse, 2 Kings 8:14. 2 Kings 8:14. Is it 8 or 18? 18, sorry. 2 Kings 18:4. I said 8:14. 18:4 is what I meant.
He removed the high places and broke the image and set down the grove and broke in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. After those days, the children of Israel did burn incense to it, and he called it Nashon.
Right. So this is, I'm sorry, which king is it? Does it say?
Hezekiah.
Hezekiah. Yeah, thank you. Hezekiah. So remember in the days of Hezekiah, well, you remember the story, right, where fiery serpents came in and bit the children of Israel because of the rebellion, and Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a stick, and so if they looked at it, they would be healed. But what happened? What did the children of Israel do with the bronze serpent? They started worshiping it. Even though it was a great reminder of God's deliverance and God's goodness, they weren't supposed to worship it. And so Hezekiah destroyed it because it became a thing of worship. And so in the same way, I can't help but, whether we know that was the really stone on which his body was prepared or not, or that's the spot where Jesus was born. Either way, we see this propensity of mankind to want to worship a thing. Whether it's a brass serpent, whether it's a piece of rock, we want to worship a thing. And I do believe that's honestly why we don't have any pictures of Jesus. We don't know what he looked like. We don't have any statues of Jesus. We don't know that, okay, this is the stone where his body was prepared. We don't know exactly where he was born. Because, man, we just have this desire to want to worship a thing in a place. And of course, that's not, we worship a spiritual, we have a spiritual church building, right? And all those things don't matter. And that's the point of Christianity. None of that matters. We don't need to know where he was born. We don't need to know where his body was prepared. That's irrelevant to our Christianity. And so I just thought it was interesting that, 3,000 years later, people want to do the same thing. Whether it's a bronze serpent or a slab of stone, we want to worship a thing. And none of that has really changed. This I want to show you this just real quick. This is inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is supposedly where Jesus' body was buried when he was rose from the dead. So it's inside there. We didn't get in the line. The line was horrendous. So we actually didn't go in. And this is where sort of the Catholic Church believes that Jesus was buried. But there's another place called the Garden Tomb. And of course, I guess the Protestants have to say, no, we have the place where Jesus was actually buried. And so this is where we went to go see the Garden Tomb. And this is where a lot of non-Catholics, Protestants think he was buried. And so that's why this is the inside of it. And so whether it is or not, this is certainly a first century tomb, right? They have the big stone they rolled in front of it, and I don't know why I didn't put that up there to show it. But this is certainly what a first century, we do know this is a first century tomb. And this is probably what it did sort of look like where Jesus was buried. But I want you to notice this. This is one of the reasons they think that this is where Jesus was buried. This is called a Byzantine cross back here. And so when they found this tomb, they found this Byzantine cross. The Byzantine era was about 500 AD, so about 500 years roughly after the events we read in the New Testament. But the Byzantine church at that time, they marked holy sites with these crosses. And so when they found this tomb, and I don't know exactly when they found it, when they uncovered it, they found it marked with a Byzantine cross. So whether or not this is the tomb of Christ, at least it's marked by people who were closer to the time, right? This is 2,000 years later. That was within about 400, 500 years of when Jesus, and so that's when they think, so that's one of the reasons they think that this was marked by these sort of early Christians. But it's still 500 years later, so who knows? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
No, that's right.
Graham, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that stone. Did you have an opportunity to touch it, or?
Yeah, you could go in there. You could go inside of it. Yeah. Yeah.
I know it's stone and stone, but did it feel like the stuff that weaves through here?
Yeah. No, I mean, I wouldn't have noticed anything different. It's very rough hewn. You see, and maybe it was plastered. It looks like maybe they put plaster on it. But other than that, it was just crudely carved out of the stone. It wasn't like luxurious marble or anything like that. It was just a very crude stone tomb. But yeah, we went inside, and that was kind of cool. I enjoyed that. Okay, so now this is a museum in Israel, and I'm going to tell you, this is called, well, I want to tell you, I want to get you to guess first. But this is by far one of the best things we did in Israel. And if you ever get a chance, you want to go here. This is the top of the museum. So if anybody can guess what this is supposed to represent, I'll buy you lunch. Anybody want to guess what this represents?
I know, but I'm not going to say.
Oh, you do? All right, then don't say it.
Well, from week one, would it be a flying saucer?
No, but that's a fine guess. Okay, so this is actually the museum's name is the Museum of the Book. And this is supposed to represent the top of one of the jars they found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute, because that was a hugely, hugely important discovery. So when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were in these clay jars, and this is what one of the tops would have looked like. And like I said, I'm just going to show you some things we saw in the book of the museum, or the Museum of the Book. But really, I mean, we had to run through it. If there's anything I wanted to go back and look at and it would spend a lot of time, it was definitely this place. So just a couple of the really cool things we saw, and look at that, it's still messing up. All right, out front they have this really, really cool model of what Jerusalem would have looked like during the 1st century AD. Just a couple of things I'll show you real quick. This is the Fortress Antonia where Pontius Pilate was, where Jesus would have been taken before Pontius Pilate. But right beside it is the temple, right there. And so you can see how close everything is. In my mind, you think about like a city today, like you have to drive and take us a long time to get places. Not so in Jerusalem. It was very, very small and compact. Okay, so somebody read Genesis 31, 19, real quick. And then somebody else look up Leviticus 19:4. Leviticus 31:19 and then 33 through 35. Whoever gets there, just start reading it.
Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's.
Yeah, and then skip down and read 33 through 35.
And Laban went into his tent, into Leah's tent, and into the two maids' tent, but he did not find them. And then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. And Laban searched all throughout the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let it not displease my lord, if I cannot rise before you, for the manner of woman is with me." And he searched, but did not find the household idol.
So, I don't know about you, but I always thought of like idols like being a big block of wood or stone or something like that. And it's like, how did she put those in her saddle? How did she sit on those things? But these are what the household idols would have looked like. This is Baal, the storm god. But this is also Baal. He was represented as a cow. And so you understand later when the children of Israel made the golden calf, they were making an image of Baal. But, so this would have been in a house. And see, they have these little, like idols themselves have little houses. And you would put your little god in the house, at night. And then when you wanted to worship your god, you would take your little god out, and worship your god, then put him back in his house. So they were small, right? And so you can understand when the idols of the house were stolen, how she could put them in the camel's saddle and get away with that. So it just helped me understand that. But then somebody read Leviticus 19:4.
Do not turn to idols, nor make for yourselves molten gods. I am the Lord your God.
So molten gods means out of metal, right? And that's what I found interesting about these gods. They're made out of metal. So this would have been so this is a great example of when you think about the gods they were worshiping and the Canaanites were worshiping, the children of Israel were tempted to worship. These are actually what the gods would have looked like. So I thought that was very interesting as well. Okay, now this is really, really, really important. These are silver bands that were a silver scroll that was found rolled up inside a tomb of a Jew in about 600 BC. And somebody read that for me. Number 6:24. If you can't read it up there, look it up. Number 6:24 through 26.
The Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord deal kindly and graciously with you. The Lord bestow his favor upon you and grant you peace.
Okay. So this would have been like if you were buried maybe with the Bible, right? That's all it is. But it's really important because it dates to about 600 BC. This is very, very old. And what's interesting about it is it's much older than the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's from Numbers. But why it's important is because if you look at that, the words that are written there, and you go a couple of thousand years later, you find the same words exactly translated in the book of Numbers. So it's important because people say, well, you can't trust the Bible. It was hand copied and they made mistakes and somebody really wrote it several thousand years later. But here you see that this very, very old script from 600 BC, you compare it with copies that are a couple of thousand years later, it's exactly the same, right? So the Jews, and that's a whole study in itself, about how the Jews were very, very careful when they copied things. But it shows the Jews believed this was the Word of God, and they were very, very careful in how they copied it. Yes?
And another thing, too, is you talked about higher criticism.
Yep.
And one of the higher criticisms is, the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch or whatever, it was edited during the Babylonian captivity.
Right.
But this shows that it was well established in their culture, so much so that they wanted to be buried with it or whatever.
Right.
It was already part of their culture during the Babylonian captivity. So
Right.
that doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
Again, it shows that, like you were saying, making the point that the scriptures have been preserved for many thousands of years.
Right. And preserved accurately, you know. Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Did you have a name for this? I didn't.
The name of it,
For this scroll there, did I miss it?
I don't know. It's just a tiny silver scroll. I don't know the name of
I'm
it.
sure there is one, but
I'm sure there is one, but I don't know what it is. Yeah, but you could Google it just by the silver scroll of whatever. But anyway, it's just absolutely, it's very, very important that we can confirm what's the accuracy of the Bible by very old things like this. So this is the oldest example of Hebrew writing we have. All right. We're going the wrong way again. Okay, now this I found really, really interesting. This is also in the Museum of the Book. This is from the 1st century AD. So this is the same time that Jesus would have been crucified. This is the actual bone they found. This is called an ossuary. And so when they would somebody would die, they would put their body in a tomb and let it decay. And then later they would gather up the bones and they would put it in an ossuary. So it was just the bones of the person, right? So they found this, and it dates from the 1st century AD in this area. And they found evidence of crucifixion, Roman crucifixion. This is the ankle bone of a human being with a nail driven through it. And so they think it would have looked like this. This is how their feet would have been nailed to the cross, right? And whether the arms were tied or exactly how they were nailed, that's a subject of, we don't really know how that happened. But now we certainly know how their feet were nailed to the cross, right? Because we have an example of it. Why this is important is not only does it show, of course, that crucifixion actually occurred in the 1st century AD, but we have all these written accounts of crucifixion, right? This is the only archaeological evidence of crucifixion. That's important because there were all these hundreds and thousands of written accounts and no one doubted, oh yeah, of course there was Roman crucifixion. But until they found this, they actually had no archaeological evidence that it occurred. And so this is the only archaeological evidence of crucifixion actually occurring. And so my point of that is, when you think about archaeology, and what it can and can't do, just think about that. No one doubts that when all these stories about crucifixion, no one doubted that it occurred, but there was no proof of it. This is the only proof. But now we do have it. So I think that's important. As you think about, it's like, oh, well, if you claim this, why is there no archaeological evidence of it? Well, it's because of the nature of archaeology, right? Things just don't last for 2,000 years. So it's important that it is confirmed when we can get it. Okay. All right, so I wanted to mention the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is on the edge of the Dead Sea, literally. And they weren't found until late in the 1940s. And they were found because there was this little Arab shepherd boy who was out grazing his flocks. And he saw a cave, little boys are little boys, so he was just chunking rocks into the cave for no particular reason, just to be throwing rocks. And he heard something shatter. And it was a masonry jar that had these scrolls in them. And this is actually one of the caves right there. And if you're wondering how, it's so high up, how did the little kid get up there? So apparently this is eroded over the years. And it was higher at one time, is what I've been told. But this is actually, you can stand, there's a little platform there, you can stand and look down and see that's one of the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And this is a picture of what it would have looked like. And you can see the tops of the jars here. So that's where they got the top of the Museum of the Book. But this is what the jars were like. And just to clarify what this was, there was a group of Jews, they called themselves Essenes. And so they had secluded themselves from the rest of Jewish society. And they had all of these scrolls, and probably, we don't know for sure, they probably hid them in these caves because the Romans were coming to destroy Jerusalem. Does that sound about right from what you know, Art?
Yes.
Yeah. So this became incredibly important because these scrolls were much, much older than anything else that had been found. And they found all the books of the Bible, of the Old Testament, sorry, not the New Testament, of course, of the Old Testament, except the book of Esther. That's the only one they didn't find. And then they found a bunch of writings about rules for their community, how their community was to function. But it became important because, for example, and we're going to talk about this in just a minute. Well, I might as well go ahead and show you this. This is inside, remember the Museum of the Book, that dome? This is inside. This is called the Scroll of Isaiah, and they wouldn't let us take pictures in there, so this is a bad picture I pulled off the internet. But the reason, for example, the role of the Scroll of Isaiah is so important is because what they found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it was a complete book of Isaiah. It was 1,000 years older than anything else they had. 1,000 years older. So what do you think they found? What do you think they discovered when they compared this ancient text of the book of Isaiah with the other text 1,000 years later? Do you think it was essentially the same, or do you think it was very different? What would you guess?
Almost exactly.
Exact 99% the same. 99%. And the changes were small, like maybe they missed a letter, or they repeated a letter in a word, or copied a word twice, or something like that. And so again, that goes back to the fact that one of the major criticisms of the Bible is that it was passed down supposedly through thousands of years, and that it was copied by hand, so of course they made changes, or a priest got a hold of it, and he made a bunch of changes to it. But what you can see is over 1,000 years of hand copying, it's exactly, or 99% exactly the same. There are no, one of the things about Isaiah is, somebody wrote half of it here, and then later somebody wrote another part of it. But what they found is there's no evidence for that. So when you hear these stories about, like you were saying, like the book of, whether it's the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, they were written by different people and then all jammed together. There's no evidence of that. That's a supposition. Basically, look at the text and go, well, somebody wrote this and somebody wrote that, and they put it all together. But there's no evidence of it. The only evidence we have is that's exactly how the Jews transmitted it over the years. And so it becomes very, very important. And what you can do, and by the way, this is the scroll. This is supposed to be a scroll handle, right, where they rolled up the scrolls. And then around it is the text from the book of Isaiah. But even that's a reproduction. The real thing is apparently in a vault deep underground. It's because that, it of course represents something extremely important to the Jews and their heritage. So that's very important, yeah.
If they were talking that it was God's word, right? It must have been inspired.
Right.
At that time, so therefore that eliminated any
errors. Right. Yeah. But it's so fascinating because I think you're exactly right. They believed it was the Word of God and they were taking great care with it. But you can see there's enough, okay, we missed a letter here, we added a letter there, just tiny little things like that it was still in the hands of people, right? And so it just tells this wonderful story of the inspired Word of God being passed on. But there's enough things like that make you realize it was real. It's like, why do we have 4 Gospels? Why not just 1? Because they differ, right? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, the scrolls were in sections.
Right.
And they knew, the Jews were very meticulous. It was actually better in some ways. They were more meticulous about copying the Old Testament than they were in some ways the New Testament. But they had all these rules, the Masoretic Jews did.
Right.
And they knew, okay, this section of the scroll is supposed to have so many words. And they'd count up the words afterwards, and they would verify them as they were going. But if the number wasn't right, they would discard that whole section of scroll. Right. I mean, it would just be thrown out. It'd be burned or destroyed or whatever. Right. So they had all these insane rules to preserve the integrity of the copying process.
That's what I'm saying. That could be a whole class we could do just on that. But anyway, what I was going to say just real quickly about the Gospels, there's 4 Gospels to have 4 witnesses. And some say there was one blind man, some say there were two. And that's not a contradiction. That's just eyewitnesses giving different details, right? So that's why I think it's important that we see something like this. And so there's a trail. You can see how it was translated and how careful people were with it. And I just wanted to make a side point real quick. Have any of you ever read the Book of Mormon? Anybody ever actually read it?
I've tried.
I've tried. So I read it. And if you don't know what it is, it's supposedly Joseph Smith found the angel Moroni, revealed to him the Book of Mormon buried, that was on gold plates written in Egyptian hieroglyphics, and then he translated it using special stones that he could see through. But my point is, if you read it, I mean, this is the basis of the Mormon religion, right? And let's just be honest, there are probably more Mormons today than there are members of the church. There are. And if you read it, it does sound a lot like something you would read in the Bible. It does. It has people and places and things like that. But here's the difference. You don't find any of these people or places ever mentioned anywhere in history. You can't go and say, oh, this is the city that's mentioned in the Book of Mormon. You can't find, oh, here's the person, and I'll get to you in 1 second, mentioned in the Book of Mormon. And there's certainly no history like this where you could tell people very carefully, copied down what was written. And so there's a big difference when somebody says, well, this is the Book of Mormon. It's another gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, it's nothing like the New Testament. It's absolutely nothing like it. There's no real people, there's no real places. Yeah, go ahead.
There's been like over 300 changes to that book.
Right, and you can show that. Right. No, that's a very good point.
There's been no changes to the Bible.
Right, exactly. That's kind of the point I was trying to make, that people have consistently copied the Bible because they believed it was the Word of God without changes. Okay, let's move on. So, this I thought was really interesting. This is, when we were there, we went into a Jewish restaurant. And I noticed as you go into the Jewish restaurant, above the door to the Jewish restaurant are these two things. Does anybody know what either one of those things are? Come on, if you've ever eaten in a Chinese restaurant, you know what one of them is. It's a good luck cat. And if you ever go to a Chinese restaurant, they'll usually have one that's supposed to bring fortune, good fortune, right? Did you know that?
I was gonna say, yeah, they wave to you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they have a little paw that goes like that, right? And so it's a Chinese good luck cat, and it's supposed to bring good fortune, and money. And so, they have it in their business. And does anybody know what the second thing is? It's from Turkey, and it's called the Eye of Nazar. And you might see it in jewelry sometimes. People wear it as jewelry, but it's really, and people probably in the United States don't know what it is. I think it's actually very pretty. But it's actually supposed to represent warding off the evil eye. It's supposed to be so it looks like an eyeball. See, it looks like a big eye. But it's from Turkey, and it's very popular these days. And so people sometimes wear it to ward off the evil eye or to bring good fortune. But what I thought was so fascinating is, here's this Jewish restaurant, right? And I don't know if they were Orthodox Jews worshiping the one true God, but how easy it is to incorporate, these magical symbols from different cultures. I mean, this is from China. Turkey's not so far away, but I just thought that was so interesting how easy it is. You wonder, how did those Jews fall into idolatry? Here's the God that led them out of Egypt, and they get into Canaan, they don't destroy all the people like they're supposed to, and then they fall into worshiping false idols. How in the world could they do that? Well, is that 5 minutes or is that in? 5 minutes, okay. So how could they do that? But I just thought that was so fascinating. Here's this Jewish restaurant, and they're like, hey, we need good luck. Whatever brings us good luck, let's incorporate that. So can't you see how that's how people think about these gods? Well, yeah, we worship the true God, but, here's Baal over here, so let's just put him, and let's put the Asherah, and we're still going to worship Jehovah, but, let's just embrace all these gods. And how easy that is to do, brethren. And let's not think that we're not tempted to do that today in Christianity, right? That, yeah, we worship Jesus, but, those Hindu gods, Krishna, that's not so bad, right? And how about Buddha? He's like, very zen and very laid back. Let's take some of these Buddhist teachings over here and how easy it is to just wrap our arms around those things and say, well, there's some good in all religions, right? There's good in all of it. So we're going to take that and we're just going to make it better. And you can see how the Jews did that and how easy it is for us to do that. And why, quite frankly, we're probably not as popular and numerous as some other religions if we say, nope. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. You can't come to God any other way but in Jesus Christ. That's narrow-minded, that's exclusive, that's intolerant, but that's what Jesus said, right? And so we have to be very careful. It's so easy to open ourselves up and wrap our arms around all the good things. Oh, it's just good luck, And I'm not necessarily talking about that. I'm just trying to say that in our religion we have to be careful to preserve, exactly what the Bible says, and really understand how people can fall into idolatry, and we can do it ourselves. Okay, let's end with this really quick. Someone can read 1 Samuel 7:2 and 1 Samuel 7:40, just real quick.
17.
I got dyslexia. 1 Samuel 17:2 and 1 Samuel 17:40.
Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines.
Okay, so this is the Valley of Elah. This is it. And you can see, right, there are two hills on both sides. And you can see, like, Israel on one side, and you can see the Philistines on the other side. They're just looking at each other, right? And then out walks Goliath, and he's standing in the middle of this field and taunting Israel, saying, hey, you worship this God of Jehovah? Come on, take me on. Well, I'll battle anybody. And so you can just see that laid out. And it's 1 Samuel 17:40. It says, David took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. So there is a brook nearby. It's called a wadi because it only floods when it rains. It doesn't have water in all the time. But we walked down into it, and I picked up 5 smooth stones, so you guys can see these. And so this is actually from the area. And I don't know exactly this is the size of the stones, but in physics you learn force equal mass times acceleration. So they couldn't have been too small, otherwise it just would have bounced off. It couldn't have been too big, otherwise he couldn't have gotten into a sling. So my guess is they were probably around this size, right? And you can imagine, you can look at these, like I said, but you can imagine David picking up these smooth stones from this riverbed and, flinging them at Goliath in this place here, in this big open field, and he falls down. David takes the sword and chops his head off, and then all the armies, the Israelites rush over and attack them. You can just really see that happening. But let me ask you something. If David had faith, why did he pick up 5 stones? That Goliath would be delivered into his hand. Why did he pick up 5 stones? Anybody want to guess? I don't know. I'm just asking. What do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it says faith without works is dead. Then alone, you have to put something behind that faith.
Absolutely.
Behind that faith.
That's right. Well, the old joke is because David heard Goliath had 4 brothers, so maybe. But it's also true that David believed he was going to overcome, but he didn't necessarily know he was going to overcome on the first try, right? We might have to try more than once to overcome whatever it is in our life. So you might have to pick up more than 1 smooth stone. Yeah.
It could be something as easy as a psychological effect on an impatient giant who is standing across the field mocking you, and you just kind of walking and you picking up one, and you pick up another,
Oh.
and you pick up another.
Yeah.
And it could have been something as simple as that.
That's interesting. I never thought about
bearings, that. But the way it affected that giant who was ready to go, it was huge.
That's interesting. That's who he's playing psychological games. That's interesting. Yeah, and then we'll end with this comment.
Like a impulsive reaction thing. You reach down and grab a bunch of stones. There's 5 or 6. 3 or 4.
That's true too. So that's another interpretation. We don't know why, but in any event, I just thought it's just